Okay, welcome everyone. This is the Ethereum sequencing and pre-confirmation call number 5, technically our 6th call. And today I'm super excited to have Aztec Labs discuss base rollups and considerations regarding layer 1 censorship. And I think this is potentially a call that's going to discuss some of the breakthroughs that we did in London during the sequencing call there. So without further ado, I'll hand the floor to Aztec Labs.
Hi, everyone. Hopefully you can see this okay. If you can't, Justin, please feel free to yell at me.
All good.
Yeah, nice. So I'm Cooper. I'm on the product team at Aztec Labs. Historically, we've called me the head of decentralization. My job has been making sure that we launch kind of fully decentralized from day one of Aztec. And what that looks like for us is kind of designing our sequencing selection software and how all the provers will talk to each other. Very excited to share today, kind of our current thoughts on based rollups. We've been talking about it with, Justin and all the people on this call for many weeks now. And yeah, super excited to be here. Yeah, so many people have asked in the past week. Just to be super clear, Aztec is currently not a based rollup, but it may become one eventually. I think that this is kind of important to kind of reconcile. We think about this as a potential future roadmap item for Aztec and potentially a very important one. And so just, a little meme for good measure, this is where I'd put my base rollup if I had one, and we definitely might have one in the future. And so, yeah, just kick it off with some kind of disclaimers. A lot of these are my current weekly held opinions. I think a lot of why we're here is to get other people's opinions. Many of them are kind of consistent throughout Aztec Labs. We're a growing and a big organization. And we're trying to build a very diverse community where everyone has, very conflicting opinions. If everyone at Aztec was on the same page, that's kind of a less fruitful world to live in, I think, than one in which we're kind of driving ourselves forward and pushing ourselves to get to the best design space. We do and will continue to disagree with each other a lot. So if you talk to someone at Aztec Labs, they might not agree with me. They might not agree with the project. I think that that's actually healthy if you're trying to build a decentralized blockchain ecosystem. And yeah, a key point is eventually Aztec's roadmap will be in the hands of its community. We really mean this. When we try to launch day one with a fully decentralized sequencing and proving set, we want it to be in their hands. And we'll talk a little bit more about what this means. And yeah, and so regardless of what we say, what I say, what my takes are, it's important to know that the community can become based later, right? Like this is not a decision that we want to make in isolation. This is not a decision we want to make on behalf of our community. We want to make a decision that sets the community up to be most likely to be successful over time and make decisions that they think are in the best interest of Aztec. Cool, sorry, one second. Part 2 of the disclaimers. We're not super here to debate any specific definitions, philosophies, etc. We would love if you debate these publicly, especially in our research forum. I'll share a specific link later. We're not here to sell you on anything or encourage people to use Aztec. That's not the goal of why we're here. We're here to share some ideas in a neutral format with our peers. Yeah, thank you to Justin. And, this is probably the most stacked set of calls I've ever been on in my life. And so the amount of energy here is just, truly inspiring for us. And so we're really excited about that. And we're here because we think those people can actually help us improve our designs. And we think that these people can actually help Aztec be a better network. And we're here because we think that these might just help other layer 2s in general. Like, our research is not Aztec specific. And yeah, so I'll talk, this is kind of the end of my preface here, but the most important takeaway from this is like, we'd love for anyone on this call, anyone interested to be part of Aztec's community. Like our goal is just to credibly neutral bring privacy to Ethereum. And we're going to have a series and an N number of difficult decisions throughout Aztec's life cycle. And we'd love for the people on this call to help us make difficult decisions. And so, yeah, Aztec's community is really the one at the end of the day that I think should be making this decision on whether to be based or not. I think we can try to set up the community to be as successful as possible. And that's kind of how we see ourselves stewarding the Aztec network. So thank you for listening to my preface. Enough of that. Let's kind of get started here. What are the benefits for Aztec becoming base? It can actually provide faster block times than Aztec's current MVP designs. I think a lot of people say that you might need, espresso or some of these other shared sequencers or another mechanism to get finality faster than L1 block times, which is very true. And Aztec's current designs, our block times are way slower than Ethereum's block times. And so if we do this, we can actually meaningfully improve Aztec's block times. It's less engineering work. In theory, I think that this has always been one of the key value propositions of reusing L1 PBS infrastructure, et cetera, all the L1 consensus. Synchronous composability with other rollups in theory is something that is a huge, value proposition, and we, cannot ignore that. And it's more Ethereum aligned. It is more in spirit with Aztec's goals of bringing privacy, as credibly neutral to Ethereum as possible. So I think like everyone in Aztec would agree with these. I think, this is very straightforward. What are kind of like the high level counter arguments that we're currently seeing for becoming based? Our roadmap more explicitly becomes Ethereum's roadmap, right? If you become based, you're kind of inheriting the changes coming to the staking layer, to proposing, to inclusion lists, all these other things, at least in a more meaningful and direct way than, other layer twos that might have their own sequencing infrastructure or something like that. And this means that you have a reduction of sovereignty, right? Like you do have to inherit Ethereum's roadmap and, effectively the social consensus on what should go into Ethereum's roadmap. And I think that there's like a fundamental question that we ask ourselves is like, do we want to internalize this uncertainty or kind of externalize it? For a lot of teams who aren't super opinionated, it probably makes a lot of sense to externalize this uncertainty and kind of ride with Ethereum's roadmap. But these are like really, kind of important questions to the project and to the community. Like what if we want to deploy immutably and things just kind of drastically change, right? Like, do we have as much confidence in this design as something that we can kind of internalize? And like, this is more of like a project specific philosophy, and Aztec generally likes to build stuff. We don't love outsourcing. We don't want to outsource our risk or our roadmap in a lot of cases. And so I think, this kind of sovereignty of our specific roadmap is, one of the key arguments or one of the key reasons we would consider not becoming based, is we can come up with a roadmap that's ideal in our mind, not ideal in the mind of the entire Ethereum ecosystem in a way. It has less well-defined or understood economic impact. It could definitely have just as good economics. Justin and others have talked a lot about how you can still have your own token, you can still have MEV-burn, you can have fee shares, you can have all those things. But there's like a 40 IQ question in our mind, or at least my mind, of like, are projects with large staking networks just kind of worth more? Just from the market's perspective, like, not like in practical terms of economic security or otherwise, but like, will the market perceive something with their own large distributed staking set as a more valuable project to potentially invest in than something that doesn't have one? We do think that L1 censorship could impact the value proposition. We'll talk about this, throughout the presentation. Specifically, Aztec's ability to get significantly faster block times are kind of predicated on a minimal amount of soft censorship, right? If people are delaying Aztec transactions, and the goal is to try to produce Aztec transactions or blocks as quickly as Ethereum can produce blocks, soft censorship can kind of eat into that value proposition in a way. But we'll talk more about that throughout the presentation. And similarly, L1 congestion could impact the value propositions, like if blobs are backlogged for inclusion due to high demand or otherwise. Those are not things that are unique to becoming based, right? All rollups deal with soft censorship or blob, gas prices spiking and stuff like that. We'll talk a little bit about how they might be worse, though, in a based Aztec design. So these are like super, super high level counter arguments, and you'll know that most of these are like, in a sense, kind of like a business decision or like a project decision, right? They're not inherently just technical. They're kind of like, what do you want out of your project? Yeah, costs could go up with that one. And so to be based or not to be based, really, this is a multi-billion-dollar question for Aztec, for all the other L2s that are considering it. And it's not something that you can kind of take lightly. It's a really important thing to think about. And this is like kind of how Aztec is thinking about its roadmap, just to set the stage for people to have some context. We currently have a local developer environment. You can write Noir programs, you can deploy them to an Aztec node, and we're currently building a testnet. I would say it's coming soon. Everyone says that, but hopefully ours is actually coming soon. If you really want, you can deploy the local developer environment to a persistent node and have like a one-node testnet, but that's not as interesting. I think, and this is my opinion, is we should build a very basic, fully decentralized sequencer protocol. This is Aztec articulated on our research forum. If you go to forum.aztec.network, We did a request for comments on it. Many of the wonderful people on this call submitted other designs and things like that to it. But I think we should build like a very, very basic, fully decentralized protocol. And this should be like the V0 kind of Aztec in a way. It might not even support contract deployments. Like it might just be for sequencers. And in this case, we could actually set up the sequencer set themselves to choose to upgrade the network to enable contract deployments, so to choose to enable application deployments. And I think that after we have this kind of MVP of a fully decentralized, credibly neutral, privacy-focused rollup on Ethereum, right? Like we hit a huge milestone. Like we would be the first meaningful rollup that has fully programmable privacy on Ethereum, even if there's like obvious ways that it could be improved. Like I think that that's just like a really important milestone for the industry, and there's a lot of incentives to try to get there as quickly as possible. But kind of as part of this, we do think that the community, the Aztec community, i.e. the sequencers and the token holders and everyone on this call that cares about privacy on Ethereum, should consider performance optimizations to be the priority for the first or second upgrade to Aztec. We see two kind of different paths forward here, and obviously one of them is based rollups and based sequencing, and so we'll talk about that. And so, thinking through this model of our roadmap, like if the first upgrade, second upgrade is going to be specific performance improvements, there's kind of two categorical ways Aztec can have faster block times. One is actually going opposed to based rollups. One's kind of becoming more sovereign-ish in a way. Building an L2-based consensus protocol, and one of them is becoming a Validium. If we can just throw like an ungodly amount of DA somewhere, we can kind of become an optimistic ZK rollup. We'll talk about this in a bit. The other option is becoming based. And we can have a very, very fast-based rollup by having faster cryptography. I don't know if this actually means real-time proving in the same way that other people on the call does. Aztec has client-side proving even in V1. So you send as a user a zero-knowledge proof to the network. But generally, Aztec can have faster block times in a base setting by having faster cryptography. Obviously, faster cryptography will make Aztec faster across the board. That doesn't, kind of goes without saying. Another option is having significant economic collateral on block proposals in a base design. So we'll talk a little bit about the trade-offs here. The counterpoint to building some of these things, so an L2-based consensus protocol is like, this isn't hard. A lot of people have built L2 consensus protocols. This is just engineering scope. If we want to invest in this direction, we kind of, it's a pretty clear path forward. Becoming a Validium, that's not very Ethereum aligned to us. That's just, that's not kind of what we're doing. Yeah, Justin.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight that becoming a Validium and becoming a rollup is somehow orthogonal to the sequencing. Like you can be a based Validium or based rollup. And I also wouldn't say that it's not necessarily very Ethereum aligned. Like if you do choose to use Ethereum sequencing, then, sorry, it's Ethereum settlement alone, then you're kind of inheriting, maybe ETH as money to an extent. And if you choose to do sequencing, then you're even more aligned, even though you might choose to not use the DA layer.
Totally agree. Yeah, it's definitely a spectrum.
Yeah, I had a question on it, Justin. I guess like if you have like a normal case of 10-minute block times, but you're kind of using alternative DA to enable based sequencing for your kind of normal kind of like rollup data. So can you hear me?
I can hear you. The connection is not very good, but I can just about hear you.
Yeah, but basically, like if you end up creating a load of applications where the security of the transactions are based on kind of like pending state updates on an alternative DA, yeah, like it feels like you're in a bit of a weird position because you have a load of transactions that would not happen if you were just using Ethereum DA. They would happen if you're using alternative DA. So those transactions don't inherit Ethereum security because, like, if you take it out an info, you're trading on state that doesn't exist and only exists in the kind of alternative DA universe. So is that still a fair statement?
Right. So when you choose an alternative DA layer, like you do lose some things, like you do lose censorship resistance because this other DA layer can potentially censor you. You do lose like liveness, and maybe there's a data availability failure where an attacker kind of basically manages to fool the DA layer to make it think data is available when actually it's not available, and then your Validium like completely stalls. It just can't move forward, which is a really big failure. But on assuming that there is no failure on a slot by slot basis, then you still can get the full synchronous composability and the other advantages that base sequencing provide.
Yeah, that makes sense. I also don't think we're talking about any of these things as like mutually exclusive, right? Like you would use multiple of these techniques to make block times faster.
Right.
I appreciate it. Yeah, faster cryptography, counterpoints this hard. Like obviously everyone's trying to make cryptography faster. We're working on a new proving system called Honk. And with significant economic collateral, this could potentially centralize around the entity willing to post collateral. It could also push out solo proposers and increase potential censorship concerns. And so like very high level, like we kind of see this as what's, favorable and not favorable. If we had to consolidate it down to top 2-3 things in each category. Based rollups, you get sequence and synchronous composability. You're more Ethereum aligned. You do have some censorship risks, and you do have a little bit of an uncertain roadmap. In Sovereign, you're less sensitive to those censorship risks. You can kind of internalize them, and people in your validators have kind of opting into the risk that may come with proposing or sequencing for a privacy-focused layer 2. It's a lot of engineering. It might be better for the Aztec ecosystem. We're not convinced. There's a question mark there for a reason, and it does have weaker composability. I'd say that we're mostly concerned on the uncertainty on the roadmap and censorship risks, which is what we're here to continue talking about. And I'm excited today. We've done a lot of really nice research, in my opinion, on becoming based. We're excited to share most of that research today. It was posted maybe an hour ago on the Aztec research forum. And yeah, shout out to Lasse, our lead smart contract engineer for this research. I think he articulated a nice idea about collaborative based rollups, which might be a new articulation there. And so how base ZK in general could work. And so basically to be a based rollup, all the data needed to prove the correctness of the state transition function needs to be made available somewhere. As Justin kind of mentioned, it could be made on a Validium or an alt-DA layer. It could be made available on Ethereum. And like in a very simple case, it would be possible for Aztec to become a base rollup today. Like our research very conclusively says, if this is the direction that the community wants to go, we could do this today. However, it has some issues, and we would argue that many of them are unique to privacy protocols. And so in a simple, naive-based Aztec would send all the data needed to construct a block to L1 as part of the block proposal transactions. Otherwise, client-side proof withholding attacks are pretty easily possible. You could put up a block proposal and never reveal the proofs behind the proposal, and it could never get proven. So you'd have to have some kind of fork choice rule or something like that. And so this is the most simple model you could possibly come up with, right? If you had effectively enough DA, you could put up the block proposal and you could put up all the proofs behind the block proposal. Again, Aztec is a privacy rollup. You have client-side generated zero-knowledge proofs. You're not just sending a transaction. And because you're sending client-side generated proofs, these are massive proofs, like very, very large. And so this alone would use the current 3 blobs on Ethereum. And Aztec would be capped at about 0.8 transactions per second. If you're questioning this, I highly encourage you to go look at the Aztec forum. Lasse articulated some really, really good stuff. But we know for a fact that this would work. It would be quite cool. It would be very based. And another idea, potentially one that we think is more feasible and could get you beyond some of those initial limitations, is kind of an economically based version of Aztec, right? So we have like a naive based Aztec and we have an economically based Aztec. And so you could treat Aztec data similar to how preconfirmations work in a shared sequencer. You could require like very large economic bonds that effectively act as a guarantee that the proposal and the proofs behind that block proposal will eventually be revealed and will be made available. And if not, you'd have some fork choice rule that determines kind of slashing conditions. Maybe a mental model is that the per block bond could be more than the max Ethereum MEV ever extracted to prevent proof withholding attacks. Just taking it to the extreme, there would never be an incentive to put up a block proposal that would get kind of reorged and you'd get slashed, because you can just make the bonk so arbitrarily high that they will always, put up a proposal and reveal the data behind it. definitely just go look at the forum research and search for fork choice rules if you're curious how that would work. And yeah, so these are like the two kind of naive options that we have articulated so far. And we know, like, we're 100% confident that either of these would work. And we know that there's a clear path to kind of scaling these things, right? Through internal cryptography improvements, through compression, through, you know, more DA on Ethereum. And in the forum, we actually say that if you aren't like Aztec and you don't have all these privacy ZKPs from your client side proofs, you probably should be a based rollup is actually our current take. I think we clearly state this in the research. And so yeah, this is kind of where we got, at least on the two design options right now currently available. And we're going to talk a little bit more about censorship, and we'll talk about some other concerns. And so yeah, what kind of L1 censorship may exist, and how does this kind of impact base sequencing? So you have soft censorship, right? Delaying inclusion of transactions or blobs, and then you have like strong censorship, right? Is like if they just simply never got included. I think that these are kind of well agreed upon definitions. And so what can be done about L1 blob censorship? Like the naive idea is like, we're worried about L1 transaction censorship. You could have blob inclusion lists. I don't think that there's a huge amount of support here. And so another idea that we talked about is an idea of like a shared encrypted blob registry. I think that this is kind of a cool idea. And how it would work is you would encrypt all the blobs. You would have all the rollups, or all rollups that wanted to opt into the system, submit blobs to the same registry from effectively EOAs or one-off accounts. And you'd have rollups actually decrypt these blobs as part of their proofs, right? As part of your proof verification, you would reference this version registry. It's kind of a cool idea. And it's completely supported right now on Ethereum. No changes necessary or anything like that. You'd have to, you know, build some smart contracts and update your circuits and all those things, but you could do this. It'd be pretty cool. And so, like, I guess a question from our side is like, this would work. Like, we would no longer really be worried about blob censorship, but does this make sense economically and from like a risk management perspective, right? Like you know, if Aztec is using a encrypted blob, you know, registry with a bunch of other rollups, they're kind of opting into sharing some of Aztec's concerns in a way. It might make sense for all the privacy protocols or all the privacy focused L2s to go in this direction and kind of work together on solutions that, you know, could solve our issues collectively. And yeah, shout out to Ben Fish and Dinkrod. I think that they originally talked about this encrypted blob registry idea with Joe and Lasse a couple weeks ago in London. It's kind of a cool idea. We're not super sure if it makes sense if like other people would actually use it, either economically or just from risk management, but like kind of a cool idea. What can be done about L1 soft transaction censorship? This is kind of, you know, going against the based rollup design in a way, and is like an option, right? It's not mutually exclusive or otherwise. Is you could settle infrequently, right? You could settle every 24 hours or, you know, n hours, and you can basically mitigate and acknowledge that soft censorship can and will occur, and you just lean into it, right? You try to make those soft censorship concerns less real-time concerns for your users. And yeah, so, you know, in this logic, decoupling Aztec and leaning in could actually, you know, make more sense than trying to get closer to the entities knowing to be censoring. You try to bifurcate like user pre-confirmations and what they're worried about versus kind of settling onto Ethereum. And what can be done about strong L1 censorship? I mean, we like inclusion lists, and I would say having like guarantees on what inclusion lists will ship would actually mitigate a lot of the concerns here. Like a worst case fallback, right? If Aztec just like can't use Ethereum in some way, like it's actually causing liveness failures or otherwise, is your kind of only option at some point is to be an L1. And obviously we don't want to do that. Otherwise we would have been building an L1 a while ago. But we would, you know, again, encourage people to consider adding inclusion lists to Electra. Justin, you have another question.
Yeah, so I actually don't think that inclusion list helps at all with strong censorship. So basically the strong censorship is when there's more than 51% of the attesters who want to censor something, and they will just ignore the inclusion lists if they want to do that. So inclusion lists only help with weak censorship.
Makes sense. Thank you for clarifying. I've updated the slide. Yeah, and if that happens, I guess the only option is really to become an L1. But I don't think that we see this as like a realistic, possibility. And we are still excited about inclusion lists. Yeah, so main findings. Base rollups are much easier to implement for optimistic rollups than ZK rollups. I think that it's a simpler design space. Lasse articulates this nicely in our forum research post. Base rollups may provide like a very viable path forward to decreasing Aztec's block times. If concerned about censorships, collectively L2s could come up with shared standards that effectively mitigate this and kind of share this risk, through this encrypted registry idea or otherwise. If Ethereum wants to have serious privacy-focused solution, we think it needs to retain its credible neutrality. It's the most credible neutral platform that exists literally in the whole world, which is why we're all excited about it. We do advocate for inclusion lists and Electra, finding more neutral builders, stuff like that, we think could help, and increasing DA limitations specifically because privacy protocols have a lot of DA and we would prefer not to use alt DA. And yeah, so these are the main findings of our research. All of these things are pretty practical and they could be implemented like right now, like the short-term time horizon is quite promising. And yeah, so let's take a poll. Like, we're serious when we actually want Aztec's roadmap to be fully driven by the community. I don't know if we can do this in Zoom, Justin, but I'd be curious if we could take a poll of people on the call and see if they think that Aztec should become a base rollup.
Yeah, so we can actually do this on Telegram. I will create a poll. We can do this now, whoever's online. So should Aztec, this is fun, become a based rollup? And then we have yes, no, show results.
Yeah, and like I would say like we're very serious. We want to set the community up in the best way. We want to ship something neutral that has privacy to Ethereum, and we don't want to control its roadmap. We don't want to force the project into our direction or a direction that we think is the best. And so I'm not saying we'll abide by the results of this poll, but I'd be curious to see how it tracks over time. And maybe at some point, some version of voting like this is actually going to make the decision to upgrade Aztec to becoming a base rollup.
So here are some preliminary results. We have 17 who voted yes and 1 person only who voted no. So maybe worth hearing out who voted no. I think it's Noah.
Yeah, and last slide I have here is like, we really want all these discussions, debates to live long-term, at least in our research, on our research forum. We think it's much more approachable, accessible. It's, better for information preservation. So please, we would encourage you guys to take a look at this. And yeah, follow us on Twitter. Thank you for the time. The poll's not legally binding to Odysseus in the chat. Aztec team members are allowed to vote. Santiago, I actually think Santiago would be in the based camp. He would be in favor of Aztec becoming a based rollup. Ben, yeah, what's up?
Yeah, if you're okay doing a bit of Q&A, I wasn't sure what the agenda is, but I had a question about some things. So if you could go back to the part where you were talking about sort of the trade-off between being a base rollup and having sovereignty, I was curious to understand a bit more there.
Yeah, I mean, high level, we think that, there's a couple takes there, right? Like at a high level, we don't love token voting, like for upgrades and governance. And we were trying to design a world in which the sequencers of Aztec, the provers of Aztec, the node operators of Aztec have the ability to dictate the Aztec roadmap in a more meaningful way, trying to manifest or reflect the social consensus that you see on Ethereum, where you actually require and need the node operators to upgrade their software. And so we, really in this kind of model, or if we go with the based approach, really the only way that we see viable to upgrade the network is through some form of token voting. We're not going to have like a centralized upgrade council. The foundation themselves or otherwise isn't going to kind of dictate network upgrades. And so like maybe that's hopefully just like a practical example of where we see a trade-off with sovereignty.
But why is that incompatible with being a base rollup? That's what I didn't understand.
It's not incompatible. We're saying it could reduce your sovereignty. Like it limits the design space of what our upgrades could be.
Yeah, I didn't understand that. Yeah. So how does the aspect of involving L1 validators or allowing them to participate as sequencers reduce your ability to do that? I didn't understand.
So you could
It's whether
imagine an up. Go ahead, Joe.
It's whether there's a staking set or not. So if you have L1 proposers also staking.
I think Joe's at the airport. We should probably just mute him and
Huge Justin's kind of definition of like any Ethereum proposal can be proposed, then would reduce kind of the set of people who are Aztec aligned and care about upgrading Aztec.
So you're worried that it will reduce the number of people who are like staking and participating in Aztec, because if all the L1 proposers are like, you know, have the ability to participate as sequencers, then it may just reduce the overall size of your community of external sequencers who care about Aztec and who would be participating in this decision. Did I understand correctly? I sort of tried to piece together the.
Yeah, Joe is cutting out there. I think that you somewhat summarized it. Generally, in this model, we would be less likely to entirely rely on sequencers to facilitate Aztec upgrades, because they would care about, you know, so many other things besides us, versus a sequencing set who is exclusively somewhat dedicated to our community and what's in our best interest.
Yeah. Okay. Well, anyways, I won't take more time. It seems like to me personally, it seems a bit of a stretch. Like it seems like you could engender a lot of interest in the Aztec from the Aztec community and decision making, that without, you know, necessarily having everyone participate in sequencing. But let's table this and talk about it another time. Super interesting. Thank you, Hooper.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think it's fair, and we're not saying it completely like gets rid of your sovereignty or anything. At least through our current lens, it does change how we would upgrade the network, and we'd probably be more reliant on token voting in this model. Is at least our current thinking. I think Noah, you were next.
Thanks for having me up. I guess I'm the one person that voted no on this. I think the main reasons why is I believe that synchronous composability may be easier if you are using a sovereign BFT style consensus for that synchronous composability, as well as using, I wanted to hear kind of what do you guys kind of thoughts about how you're using alt DA with base sequencing? Because wouldn't you just be posting kind of a commitment hash for a bundle of transactions? Let's say we're using /j. Let's say we're posting 5 transactions on /j. Wouldn't you just post that kind of transaction hash on Ethereum then? So then technically the ordering is still happening on the alternative DA layer at that point. I just kind of want to get your thoughts on that. That was kind of why I voted no, is because I think that base sequencing with alt DA gets a bit confusing, as well as synchronous composability might just be easier with a sovereign layer, because you don't have to worry about Ethereum itself at that point, and it can also be cheaper then.
I think we would generally agree. Not sure if there was like a specific question in there, but yeah, the design space for base sequencing who is also using Ethereum DA seems much more clean, simple, and kind of elegant in a sense. Also, Aztec as a project who very much believes in like governance minimization and doesn't really want to have any formal governance. You know, Celestia is pretty good about this. Like they, you know, mostly do social consensus, but I'd imagine some of the other DA layers have their own governance, and Aztec would be hesitant to introduce them into the mix. Thank you for voting contrary to the herd, I guess.
Glad to.
Oh, yeah. Justin, I think you were next.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment a little bit on Ben's question. Like there is a loss of sovereignty in a very specific case, which is when you've chosen to be a base rollup and you've completely given up on your governance. So you're fully immutable. And that's something you mentioned in your presentation. Then basically you become subservient to whatever sequencing DL1 does. Having said that, my guess is that Aztec will have governance for some years to come. And the other guess that I would make is that L1 sequencing, will ossify over time. And so there might be a point in time where if you do want to become immutable, well, actually, the L1 itself will also be very close to immutable.
Yeah, that would totally make sense. I've been advocating for Aztec to try to deploy immutably for a while now. I think it would be really cool, but there's obviously a lot of practical reasons not to. And I agree, it's much more pragmatic on a long-term time horizon if Ethereum's more ossified. So,
right.
Yeah.
And then to go back to Noah's.
I think my connections a bit better now. Just on that point, I mean, even if the rollup instances are immutable, which is our current plan, so you have like V0, V1, V2 with the separate deployments, and you don't upgrade between them, the community can for bridges and we call them portals for assets coming into the network. The community could decide to use an Aztec sovereign sequencing set to move assets between mutual versions. And you lose that in a base model because that right would be conferred to now random Ethereum sequencers who may not have the same interests. So you have to have token voting as a way to kind of stop malicious moving of assets is our current view.
Yeah, Joe's going on a rabbit hole of our governance plans. The current plans are high level, have like an immutable version registry, immutable deployments. You could add new things to the version registry. And so the first deployment may or may not be immutable. And then if the community wants to deploy something with formal governance, they could do so. I do think it would be really cool to also get to a point in a world where there might be multiple versions of Aztec deployed simultaneously. Some of them might be immutable, some of them might not be, some of them might be based, some of them might not be based. Going to give you different characteristics out of the privacy protocol you choose to use. Daniel, I believe you were next.
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to add one small comment related to the sovereignty that Ben brought about. It's similar to what Justin mentioned, but on the technical side. So there is a specific reason why you would lose sovereignty over when using based rollups, and that's practically due to the restriction on who is eligible to sequence on A1. That's purely the one of the requirements of being a based rollup. So that's and you mentioned it briefly a couple of minutes ago. So you are losing sovereignty in a way because you are forced to sequence in some specific way. So you have limits on the, let's say, technical upgrades that you are able to do. But that's that may or may not be something that's small enough for you to consider a good trade-off.
Totally makes sense.
Sorry to just jump in here, but because I feel like this is something that people are getting confused on a lot. So I think we've discussed this a lot, but base sequencing doesn't mean that you necessarily are restricting the set of parties who are allowed to participate in sequencing to the L1 validators. You are giving the L1 validators the option to participate, and you are giving them a privileged ability as well to participate. But there's like a range of designs that we discussed, and so maybe for Aztec, for example, it may make sense for you to have the control in the hands of a sovereign sequencing set that only sells the right to propose to L1 validators when it makes sense, because the whole point of involving L1 validators is for synchronous composability with the L1. You don't I think we've discussed this at times, but like base rollups doesn't necessarily mean that you give up the sovereignty to L1 validators. You can also, if you have a way of including the L1 validators in a way that enables synchronous composability, at least part of the time when it economically makes sense for your rollup, that is a form of base sequencing. And that may mitigate the concerns that you have around giving up sovereignty.
But in that case, the main benefit with universal synchronous composability becomes blurred, because if you allow for optionally transferring the sequencing to L1 proposers or the L1 Coinbase at a given slot, then you're reducing universal synchronous composability by default. So unless everyone decides to sequence in a very specific way, you lower the chances of universal synchronous composability.
Yeah, it's a design trade-off. But like as we discussed, right, then Aztec may be somewhere on the design trade-off. I think the point that I'm making is that it's not completely binary, right? Aztec could choose
and I
to
think we've
involve.
talked about this where we've had like, in the current designs, we have a random leader election. That specifically randomly elected leader could choose to sell pre-confirmations through espresso or something like that. And so
or any other way. I mean, whether it's through espresso or not is orthogonal, but like you could sell it to the L1 validators, and there could be a trade-off where half the time you could give it to the L1 validators, half the time you could do it yourself. I think something that we went over in London is that like we want to have sort of a more sort of inclusive idea of what base sequencing is, because it would be a shame to create this completely binary bifurcation between like what base sequencing is and what it isn't, for the exact reasons that you're saying here. Like it would be a shame to have Aztec never do base sequencing, never involve L1 validators, just because that means a complete loss of sovereignty. So this is a great example of where having something in the middle on the trade-off space would make sense.
Yeah, that makes sense to us. And like the current designs where anyone can run an Aztec sequencer, we would never restrict them from any based activities or otherwise that they may choose to do and make money off of. I would also just say on the point, we did try to articulate at least our approach or our kind of current thinking, and so this is just like the preview of the thing I've been teasing in the forum, and so we're kind of going at it with this definition of a collaborative based rollup. And I know we all need more random definitions and flavors of based rollups, but hopefully this gives you at least a little sense of how we're thinking about it if you choose to read this. And Ben, we would love your opinions in the forum as always. Ben, you still have your hand up? Do you have other questions?
No, I'm sorry, Cooper. I just gotta lower my hand. Thank you very much. Yeah.
No worries. We're definitely getting wrecked in this poll right now. Everyone is choosing base sequencing, but I guess it is the right crowd, I suppose.
Sequencing call. So what do you expect?
There are a lot of very smart people on this call, and we also trust they're aligned with our goals of wanting to see privacy on Ethereum. So, Justin.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to Noah's question around how would it work with LDA and base sequencing, and especially with respect to synchronous composability. So one of the requirements for synchronous composability is that you have shared sequencing. And so if you have LDA, you're basically introducing a different sequencer at the DA level. And so what you can still do is basically have synchronous composability for all the validiums that have opted in to using Celestia as a DA layer. Now, there might be another approach where you can have full synchronous composability for all the base rollups and all the base validiums, which is a bit more optimistic, where basically the sequencing happens by the L1 sequencer, and they promise to eventually publish on Celestia, maybe a few seconds later. And if they don't, then they stand to get slashed. But it's not something that I've thought of much, but yeah, there might be solutions basically.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'd be curious back to the kind of specific question of like an encrypted blob registry, if anyone has takes on that. Like, it's kind of a cool idea. Economically, it seems questionable, and from risk management, it seems questionable, but I'm curious if anyone has thoughts about that specifically. Yeah, Murat. Also, I liked your inclusion list post.
Thank you. Yeah, it solves the economics problem and the censorship one, but we still need to propagate blobs faster. So regarding encrypted blobs, Mancommit has this encrypted mempool, and at least for the bids, they're encrypted. And the bid encryption is important because now you can't really basically like see what the other blobs are bidding for, and that can be kind of I guess an economic censorship kind of angle. So at least like that's what we've been thinking on. But what can be added is the whole blob in there as well, which then becomes pretty interesting. But we would have to kind of really articulate what like the registry looks like. And I don't think I was at that particular discussion in London, but like we could curate a registry through this mechanism, I think. But then it becomes a contention on like who curates the registry. Is it like a protocol level registry? Then is it enforced? Is it like an inclusion list? Does everyone see it? Can there be griefing because of that, because of the size of blobs? So there's kind of a number of problems that comes with the registry, but I generally really like the idea. And I think more kind of encryption when it comes to blobs, which are not really contending on state, is generally a good thing.
That makes a lot of sense. I'll have to read the rest of your post. I know you dropped it like right before this call.
Yeah, it was unintentional, by the way. It just happened to be very kind of, I guess synergetic at the same time.
No, it's good stuff. Odysseus, I saw you just posted EigenDA plus 4844 seems more trust minimized than Celestia. I would say technically it might be, but socially we don't think so. EigenDA has like 4 multi-sigs in it, and otherwise, so kind of different set of assumptions there. Matthew, you were next in the question queue, I think.
Sure. So how do you avoid censorship of the entire shared registry?
You couldn't. It would still be subject to soft or strong censorship, but the idea is it'd be less hard to censor specific actors in. Like the encrypted, like the whole encrypted registry could still get fucked pretty much.
So there's some like critical mass of like blob buyers who would have to participate to make it useful, because even when it's a small registry, like you wouldn't be able to censor specific rollups without censoring everyone. So at that point, it just might be more worth it to censor everyone. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it would only work if you got significant buy-in from, pretty popular rollups that are not maybe not even doing privacy things, right? That you wouldn't have, reasons to potentially censor. Lynn, I think you were next.
Yeah, I also had a question about that registry part. So when we say censorship resistance, there's like the censorship from like the next sequencer or the next proposer. There's also censorship from like the merger to the L1 network. And this encrypting the blobs, this protects against the latter and not the former, correct?
It would protect against soft censorship. It would help protect against soft censorship. As Justin correctly identified earlier, strong censorship would be if like a majority of the validators just kind of never let you touch that registry, I guess, in a sense.
But if there's soft censorship, for example, if the next sequencer said that they don't want to sequence Aztec transactions, so they won't even create the blob, then that's a form of like, how does the encrypting the blobs help that in that case?
There would be 2 different concerns. You would be worried about proposals and block proposals being censored, and separately you would be worried about TA getting censored. They're not super related. Like even in the current designs where Aztec has its own sequencer set, we still might be interested in this idea of an encrypted blob registry. Justin, you can chime in.
Yeah, so the idea basically is to change censorship from a blacklist approach to a whitelist approach. So right now, if you want to censor, there's a blacklist, for example, the OFAC SDN list. But if you have this encryption, then the only way to meaningfully censor is to have a whitelist of approved contracts. And that might still be possible. And everything that's not part of this whitelist would kind of all be bundled together. But the hope is that there's just so much activity on Ethereum that what is not part of the whitelist would be very economically meaningful. I guess another comment is that there doesn't have to be one registry. There can be an arbitrary number of registries. And actually there could be one registry per encrypted blob. So like keeping, like one of the questions is like, can you just add the registry to the blacklist? Well, that doesn't really work because you can just always create new registries. And then another thing is that we already kind of have registries. For example, we have inscriptions, like just people just post art, and like, it could just be encrypted white noise art and no one would ever know. So, I mean, other things you can do, for example, is you can push data in the lower bits of a cat image, and no one would know the wiser, and then your proof would prove that, hey, actually this cat image contains Aztec transactions. So I really do think that this encrypted block idea is very robust.
Thank
So,
you. I
sorry.
cannot take credit for it at all. Lynn, did that answer your questions? Maybe, probably not.
Yeah, just one. So you said that the proposer's censorship and DA censorship is separate. So this is the case where the proposer is honest, but the DA is. But in the base case, didn't most the same? Like, still didn't see that. So
So for settlement,
Mm,
that would be specific to the Aztec contract. So the settlement transaction could be soft censored, and so it could be delayed by the few blocks. But the blobs, there's no reference to Aztec. At the point when they're published, no one knows that it's an Aztec blob other than the person who published. And so the L1 proposer can't meaningfully censor other than if they have some sort of whitelist-based censorship, which in my opinion is not really not really workable for them.
but in the based case, doesn't the proposer also create the blob? So even if you can prevent...
The blobs are created by the builder market and the searcher market. We have proposer builder separation. The L1 proposer only signs off on the header. They have no knowledge of the block contents. And actually that is a security requirement, because otherwise the builders and the searchers can get unbundled.
I see.
Lynn, and I guess anyone else, I'm always happy to get on a call and chat, or talk about whatever. Especially if we didn't answer your question, happy to get on a call. George, I'll go to you next. I also want to thank George and the Lime Chain folks for they gave us a good doc, and we've had some calls about vanilla-based sequencing. So shout out to them.
Thank you. My question is not about encrypted blobs, and this is why I was constantly bumping myself backwards. So if anyone has
yeah, I think it's safe to change the subject. We are running out of time. I don't know if we're going to do the 30-minute overview or kind of hang out after, but okay. Feel free to change the subject.
I hate to put you on the spot, and if you tell us that maybe we should discuss this in the non-recorded section, please tell me, because I kind of know your opinion, but what's your opinion, as you said that your opinions are not Aztec opinions per se, around the specific part of base sequencing's idea that is the soft requirement or the suggestions of usage of restaking?
I'm not sure I fully understand your question. What are my thoughts on restaking as a requirement, or
would you consider this favorable or unfavorable part if Aztec is to go based?
I have not seen a governance minimized restaking platform. And so my opinion is, I would encourage the Aztec community to not adopt third-party software that is not, sharing that same philosophy.
Okay.
I don't know if that answered your question, but maybe it did.
No, your opinion answers my question. I just wanted to know what your opinion is on that.
Yeah, I mean, my opinion is we're trying to design Aztec without any type of upgradable multi-sigs, specifically for, ensuring sufficient decentralization and not necessarily individual liability or accountability. And I think that if we're preserving that within our own protocol, it would be kind of strange to adopt third-party solutions who have significant amounts of kind of antithetical design choices. Obviously, I love Eigenlayer and all the restaking folks, but Aztec has different concerns than others.
Cooper, thank you so much. We're at the hour, so I'm going to wrap this up. I do want to very quickly give the listeners who are not part of the Telegram group an update on the poll. So we've had 31 people vote yes. We've had 4 people vote no. So that's 89% voted yes. Of those who voted yes, we have Joe Andrews from Aztec and Santiago also from Aztec. And of those who voted no, we have Quintus, who voted no just because he wanted to be contrarian. On that note, thanks Cooper again for this wonderful presentation. And now we have the 30-minute open discussion that's off the record. Thank you.